Most people, number one, they get up in the morning, the first thing they do is they think about the problems in their life. And those problems are memories from the past. So the moment they think about the problems, they're thinking in the past. Every one of those problems has an emotion attached to them, so they start feeling unhappy or unworthy or whatever. And how you think and how you feel is your state of being. So most people's entire state of being is in the past when they start the day. So if they're in the familiar past, they're gonna live in a predictable future, right? So they get up and they check their cell phone, they check their text, their WhatsApp, their Facebook, they post something on Facebook, they tweet, they Twitter, they check the news, and they go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, take a shower, get dressed, check more emails, drive to work the same way, do the same thing. So they're in a program. They've actually lost their free will to the program.
Wow.
So if you start your day with this simple question, what is the greatest ideal of myself that I can be today? Ask yourself that question. Now listen, your body's gonna go like, well, we gotta get a cup of coffee, and you gotta go, body, you're not the mind, I'm the mind right now. You're gonna sit here, I'm gonna feed you, this is my time, you're gonna obey me. The body's no longer the mind, you're the mind. And so when it wants to get up and you become aware of it, and we turn back to the present moment, every time you do, that's a victory. You're changing some aspect of yourself.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more. And you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy.
Ask yourself, I do this all the time, write down 4 thoughts that you're gonna stay conscious of the whole day. I can't, it's too hard. You'd be surprised the moment you become conscious of what those thoughts are, how unconscious you've been to them all day, for weeks on end. Write down what you speak, how you speak, 4 things you wanna change, how you act. How do you act? Do you complain? Do you blame? Do you make excuses? Do you feel sorry for yourself? That's a victim consciousness. What emotions do you live by? Is it possible that you're so used to living by guilt, you don't even know it's guilt, it just feels like you? Do you allow your energy to drop? Become conscious of those states of mind and body and review them and say, this is the old self. Then say, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And start firing and wiring and start feeling it. What behaviors will I demonstrate today? What choices will I make? One day, one lifetime. And just like you did, rehearse them. Rehearse the whole entire thing. Begin to install the neurological hardware in your brain. And if you keep installing it, the hardware is going to become a software program, and you're going to start thinking and acting that way. And then here's the tough part. Can you teach your body emotionally what your future is going to feel like before it's made manifest? And don't get up until you feel that way.
Rule number 2, always keep learning.
I think the first thing is to learn. Every time you learn, you make new connections in your brain, and learning is making those connections. And I was joking with my staff this week. I said, nobody reads anymore. Nobody reads. Nobody reads anything. Learn information. Why? Because we found out that in our events, if you can be present and not look at your cell phone or not talk about your past, but be present with the content, and I can combine quantum physics with neuroscience, with neuroendocrinology, with psychoneuroimmunology, mind-body connection, epigenetics, electromagnetism. You can really get it. Like you could give me the nod, and then I say, okay, I'm looking at an audience of 1,500, 1,600 people. Okay, well, turn to the person next to you and teach it back to them. If you can't explain that, it's not wired in your brain, and you'll doubt that it's possible, and you'll do something differently. Okay, if you can explain it, then you're causing your brain to fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations. Whenever you make your brain work differently, you're changing your mind. Why? Because mind is the brain in action. So you keep reminding yourself of this. Now it's easier to forget this than remember it. You know, it takes practice. You can't get it in one bite. It's a learning process, right? So now you're installing the neurological hardware in your brain in preparation for the experience. So knowledge is the precursor to the experience, right? Without the knowledge and the information, it's conjecturous, right? So the more you understand the what in the terms of what you're doing and the why you're doing it, the application, the practical aspect, the how becomes exciting, like, oh, I'm going to get it. As an example, you can take someone and throw them in an ice bath. They have no knowledge of what that can do. And then because they have no knowledge, the ice bath is actually going to cause them harm. Right? You take that person, you can teach them a few things and put them in an ice bath and actually be instrumental. They'll actually gain value from it. Well, the prefrontal cortex, the one that said, now you got to make this valuable. You can take a person and you can put them in an environment, and they can perceive the environment as a problem and you can measure their autonomic response, and it'll weaken their autonomic response. You can take that person and have them perceive it as a challenge, and it'll actually strengthen their autonomic response. Okay, so now what's the reason behind this? Well, you gotta put as much tension on your inner world of how you're thinking and how you're feeling and how you're going to behave, as much as your outer world of three-dimensional reality. And meditation is just a way to say, okay, let me get my brain and body right. I'm going to present Ed Milet to the world today. I got one lifetime, one Groundhog Day, one day. I just want something different, something unusual, something mystical, some sign from the universe that I created. And I wanted to come in a way that I would never think of. That would be the unknown, because if I can predict it, it's the known. Okay, before I get up and grab my phone and do all my things and get plugged back into my known world, let me just say, okay, who do I no longer want to be? I want to become so conscious that I won't go unconscious again. The fundamental question is, how many times am I going to forget until I stop forgetting and start remembering? That is the moment. And there's nothing mystical about this. This is the work. And then you're going to say, okay, who do I want to be when I open my eyes? Okay, let me think about this. How would greatness live? I don't know. Read a book on greatness. Read a book on Nelson Mandela. You want to be wealthy? Read about wealthy people. And you're going to see that they didn't just make their wealth. They lost a ton of money and failed a million times. And that's reality. Okay, well, what were the qualities? They had perseverance. They had determination. They cut their losses. They forgave. They forgot about it. They went on. Okay, so how am I going to behave? Let me rehearse how I'm going to behave. What I'm going to do, let me take my time. I have plenty of time to do this. Let me just behave. Let me think about how I'm going to behave differently in this situation. How am I going to change my emotional response? When did I fall from grace yesterday and went back to my old self? I'll set an alarm on my phone every 3 hours. I'm just going to go off, and I'm going to take a moment and get back into the feelings of my future. Okay? If I can do that over and over again, well, what do you think could happen in my life as a result of it? So knowledge being the forerunner, the application, simple stuff. Practice heart coherence. There's plenty of stuff that we can talk about. Practice brain coherence. We know. I asked the brain scientists, what percentage of people at the end of a week-long event, what percentage of people will have their brains changed for the better? They said 100%, 100%. 1 week, fully immersed into the experience. You practice it every day. Now, you can't do it once or twice and say, why isn't my bank account full? You know what I'm going to tell you? You're not that good. Yeah. That's the only reason why. Yeah. If you were that good, it would happen. You're not that good. So show up again and show up again and keep showing up. And I just was talking to a staff member today. The universe only gives us what we think we're worthy of receiving, right? So then people who show up for themselves every day,
believe they're worthy.
They start feeling pretty damn worthy. Yeah. Like they're like, I'm worthy for this. Not like an entitlement way, like something. They just like, I feel like it's gonna happen. I'm worthy for it.
Rule number 3: change your inner state.
I learned a lot about expectation when I was studying the placebo. It's amazing how you can give someone a sugar pill or a saline injection or perform some false surgery or treatment, and a certain percentage of those people will accept, believe, and surrender to the thought that it's actually the truth without analyzing it, that they're getting an actual real substance. And their body begins to manufacture the very pharmacy of chemicals that causes them to heal by thought alone. So the question is it the inert exogenous substance that's doing the healing, or is it the body's innate capacity to heal? So everybody has been conditioned to a certain degree, whether we like it or not, to rely on something outside of us to change our inner state. And so when a person's given a pill and it's blue on one side and red on the other, and they take it and they notice a change in their internal state. My pain has gone away, I'm sleeping better, whatever it is. And when they notice that change in their internal state, they pay attention to what caused it and they start to associate and condition. So if you keep doing that over and over again, that pill becomes a symbol of them to change their physiology. So if you take that pill and you replace it with something that's inert, and they see that pill, based on conditioning, when they take that pill, conditioning based on the past, they begin to expect that outcome to happen again. And the expectation of the outcome is simply marrying a possibility, an intention, a vision of a future outcome, a new possibility in the quantum field. And if the doctor's enthusiastic and you name the substance something that you can't pronounce and you charge a lot of money for it, and you use a name that rhymes with something that you could associate as a known, Niagara and Viagra, there's a strong correlation. It's a lot of flow. And so people are conditioned to expect an outcome. So when they start to expect the outcome, the marrying of that clear intention, if the person is optimistic, if the person is enthusiastic, if the person is grateful for the outcome, a combination of that clear intention combined with the elevated emotion begins to change the body's physiology for them to manufacture their own pharmacy of antidepressants, their own pharmacy of morphines or pain relievers, their own pharmacy of dopamine by thought alone. So the question is, do you need the exogenous substance to change your state of being, or can you change your state of being by thought alone? And by the same means, if you give a person a prognosis and you tell them that in the chemotherapy treatments, you are going to get really nauseous and sick. They've done research on this. 50% of the people on their drive to the chemotherapy treatment start to get nauseous in anticipation of the event taking place. So the question is, can 50% of the people get well on their drive to work, or they're on their drive to their doctor in anticipation of getting the right treatment? In your studies with the power of 8, if the person can assign meaning to the value of what they're doing, and they can see, oh my God, energy can actually inform matter. Okay, that sounds like something that makes sense. Give me the quantum understanding. And you get a collective group of people, and we're discovering that collective networks of observers determine reality. And you can get them in a very specific state, and the person who's receiving the healing understands the value of what's taking place, the expectation of what's about to happen. If they're in a state of gratitude, it's kind of an interesting thing, gratitude. When we receive something, when we've just received something favorable, when something's happening to us that we really enjoy, or something just happened to us that surprises us, we feel gratitude. So the emotional signature of gratitude is something's happening to us, or something favorable just happened to it. It is the ultimate state that we receive in. So if the person's in that state of gratitude, then it makes sense then they're more susceptible to information, because we accept, believe, and surrender to information equal to our emotional state. So that can actually program the autonomic nervous system to begin to physiologically change. And that's exactly what Pavlov did with the salivating dogs. Just ring the bell and feed them a meal, and after a while, the anticipation of the event actually causes them to change their body's physiology. Their autonomic nervous system begins to change as if they're actually in the process of eating the meal. The anticipation is preparing for the event ahead of time, and we can use that to so many degrees in our favor.
Rule number 4, reprogram your brain.
The hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease. If you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, your thoughts could make you sick. And if your thoughts can make you sick, is it possible that your thoughts can make you well? So they began to realize that, oh my God, the repetition of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking caused me to feel guilt. And I don't even know it's guilt. It just feels like me. It's just, I'm used to the same chemical continuity. Now, the moment they decided to change, anytime you decide to change and change anything about yourself, get ready, because it's going to feel uncomfortable.
It's going to hurt.
You're going to leave the known.
Yeah.
You're going to leave the familiar, and you're going to step into the unknown.
Even if the familiar is uncomfortable and painful,
right?
It's still going to be painful leaving the pain.
Right, because some people are super happy being unhappy.
Right.
So then they would rather cling to their suffering than take a chance in possibility. So these people said, I really have nothing to lose, right? So then they said, I'm willing to be uncomfortable and be in the unknown. And it turns out that's the perfect place to create from. So when the body is conditioned to become the mind, then to change is to be greater than the body, right?
How
Because
do we become greater than the body?
well, that's a whole nother conversation, but let me finish this,
Yes.
okay? So the third thing they said was, okay, so now that I know that I got to break the habit of being myself and I can't mismanage my thoughts and feelings, I got to change how I act, I got to watch how I speak, I got to become conscious of how unconscious I am, because 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors, like a computer program, emotional reactions, unconscious beliefs and perceptions. So the first step to change is to become conscious of how you think, to notice how you act, to pay attention to how you feel. And the act of observing those states of mind and body separates you from that program. Now you're the consciousness observing that program. It turns out the more conscious you become of how unconscious you are, lighting a match in a dark place, that first step creates enormous amounts of chaos in the brain and body. And it's disturbing, so people just go back to the same addiction, the same emotion, the same problem. This feels better. No, that feels familiar. So they said, okay, now I got to change. I got to reinvent myself. Now this is really important because they started sitting down and thinking, okay, who in history do I admire? Who are great people, role models that I could follow? What are the qualities and characteristics that they have? How am I going to change? These are what we call frontal lobe questions. The creative center of the brain switches on and the emotional center settles down. So then they started thinking, how would I have to be in a new life if I was really going to heal? What would I have to change about myself? Now, there's this interesting phenomenon that if you close your eyes and you begin to think about doing something, you're an athlete, you understand this. If you're a background in football and you are running a pattern or you are doing something, you would rehearse it in your mind. Yeah. Turns out that the act of mentally rehearsing something when you're truly present, your brain does not know the difference between what's going on out there and what's going on in here. In fact, your brain will begin to look like you've been doing it for the last 5 days and you've never run the course. So now your brain is no longer a record of the past, because typically it is. Now it's a map to the future. So now you're priming your brain. So that became the very platform. Experiments with piano players. You take a group of people that never played the piano before, you divide them into two different categories. I take one group of people, you teach them one-handed scales and chords. You do a brain scan on them. They come and practice for 2 hours a day for 5 days. At the end of 5 days, if you rescan the brain, they grow new circuits on the opposite side of the brain. Nothing magical there. You learn something new. Learning's making new connections. Get some instruction. You get your body involved. Get your body involved, you're going to have an experience. Experience enriches the brain. Pay attention to what you're doing. You got to pay attention and repeat it, firing and wiring. You're going to assemble new circuits. You can take the other group of people, have them come for 2 hours a day for 5 days, do a brain scan before, the brain scan after. Have them close their eyes and mentally rehearse playing those scales and chords. At the end of 5 days, they'll grow the same amount of circuits in their brain as the people who actually physically demonstrated the action. What does that mean? It means not only do they change their brain by thinking differently, but their brain looks like they've been playing the piano for 5 days. Now set them in front of a piano. Never played the piano before. They'll play those scales and chords because their brain is wired to play it. So now, the act of rehearsing who they're going to be, what are the qualities, and beginning to get in this creative state, began to lay down the circuits of a new personality. And a new personality is connected to a new personal reality. So the next question is, does that change the body? Take a group of men, have them do one-handed curls in their mind, and bring an emotional component like stronger, harder, more intense, 1 hour a day for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, 13.5 increase in muscle strength.
Wow.
Never lifted a weight. Now their body is changing by thought alone. So these people began to reprogram their brain and body. And all of a sudden, they began to act differently. Why? Because they installed the circuits. They began to think differently, of course. They began to feel differently. They were no longer feeling pain. They're actually liking themselves, right? So then if they're living by a different emotion, and they're feeling an elevated emotion before they're healing, before they were healed, they're not waiting for their healing to feel joy and gratitude. They're feeling gratitude and joy. Now their body's believing that it's healed because the body's feeling the emotion ahead of the experience. And if the environment signals the gene and the end product of an experience in the environment is emotion, you're signaling the gene ahead of the environment. And what do genes do? Genes make proteins. And what are proteins responsible? The structure and function of the body. Now you're literally becoming somebody else. And now you're turning down the genes for disease and you're turning up these other genes. So I started to realize that this reinvention process is exactly what we've always done. It's just that we get complacent in certain areas of our life and we stop.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, get beyond yourself.
Let's demystify the present moment.
Okay.
People wake up in the morning and they think about their problems, and those problems are memories that are etched in their brain that are connected to certain people and objects at certain times and places. The moment they wake up in the morning and they start thinking of their problems, they're thinking in the past. Okay, now every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So when they feel unhappy, when they feel bitter, when they feel fearful, now their body's in the past. Thoughts are the language of the brain, feelings are the language of the body. Thought and a feeling, image and emotion, stimulus and response. You're conditioning the body to be the mind of that emotion subconsciously. Now, the body is believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Why? Because the body's so objective, it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that person is creating by thought alone.
Important. The body doesn't know the difference.
And so the environment signals the gene, that's epigenetics. The end product from an experience in the environment is an emotion. The person's signaling the same genes in the same way, and genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body, and the expression of proteins is the expression of life. And now the person is actually headed for a genetic destiny. And when people labor for the present moment, and they take their attention off of their body, off of all the people in their life, all of the objects they own, their cell phone, their computer, their car, their house, they're no longer identifying with where they're sitting, where they need to be, where they live, where they've lived in the past, where they need to go. And they're not thinking about the predictable future or the familiar past. They're dissociating from everything physical and material, everything known. That is the exact moment we call getting beyond yourself. Okay? Now, when we're in that place, then, at the beginning, it's uncomfortable because survival is the unknown. You have better chances of survival and running from the unknown, but that unknown is the perfect place to create from. So in the process, no different than any rehab. In our first 2 days of our event, really, people they're basically rehabbing from their emotional states and their habits, and they're sitting in the presence of that discomfort, right? And the discomfort is because the body is leaving the known. But if the body has been conditioned to be the mind, the moment you take it outside of its familiar territory, it's going to start telling you, Ed, why don't you quit? You know, you're not really good at this. You know, you're more of a physical person. You don't really want to do this. You're not very this or very that. And most people just get up when they do the meditation. They believe that thought as if it's true. Now, the question is, what's on the other side of that thought? Can you sit there long enough till that's no longer the thought you accept, believe, and surrender to? Well, then,
wow.
The next question:
other side of that thought?
What's on the other side of that familiar emotion? Can I sit and work with my body and settle it down? Stay. You stay. I'm going to feed you. You're not going to die from this. Your bladder's not going to explode. You're not going to go crazy. And you work with catching those thoughts. It's called metacognition. If you're in that 95% of programming where you're unconscious, then the first step to change is becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts. So conscious that you would never go unconscious or let that thought slip by you unnoticed.
I want to understand. So you're saying the awareness of the thought, being conscious of the thought, has it somehow lose its power over you?
Exactly. Because just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. And if you're left alone to yourself, you'll start believing every thought you think. And that's the problem. So then the majority of people's thoughts then are based on what they perceive about themselves from their past or their life, right? And if you catch yourself complaining and blaming and making excuses and judging someone else, and you say, I want to be a happy person, well, a happy person would never do that, would make them unhappy. If you notice that you've been feeling guilty for the last 20 years. You didn't know it was guilt because it just felt like you. And you want to feel joy. Well, if you can't feel joy, it should tell us volumes about what you've been practicing doing, right? So then most people give up because they don't know that there's anything on the other side of it. So then the next question is, what thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain? Well, and with attention and with intention, if you keep practicing firing, wiring those thoughts, you start installing hardware. Do it enough times and it becomes like a software program. And now that's the new voice you program in your head that said, I can do this. I believe in myself.
And you've created, to an extent, a new personality, which can create a new personal reality.
Now, here we go. So then the next question is, how am I going to behave with my kids today? How am I going to be with my wife? How am I going to be with my partner? How am I going to be at work? How am I going to be on my Zoom calls? How am I going to be by myself? How am I going to, what does greatness look like? What would love do today? Now, it turns out that if you close your eyes and you start imagining doing that, if you rehearse how you're going to be in those certain situations, the evidence, without a doubt, shows that your brain will start to look like, through the mental rehearsal of the act, that you've already done it. Now you've installed the hardware. Keep doing it. It becomes a software program, and you'll start acting like a happy person. No magic there. If you don't have the circuits, you can't do it. So the rehearsal then is actually changing the brain just by thinking differently. The brain looks like the experience has already happened. Now you have hardware to use. Do it enough times, you get good at it. It becomes more automatic. Now here's the hard part. Can I teach my body emotionally what my future will feel like before it happens? Now this is really important because there's a pandemic going on in the world that has nothing to do with a virus. It has everything to do with people's attention span and learning. People need a rush of dopamine in order to catch their attention, or a rush of adrenaline to learn. And so that they're dependent on their outer environment to regulate their emotional state. Now, this is different now. Now, I'm going to say to you, get in that beautiful heart of yours, and I want you to feel gratitude for the event before it occurs. Well, I can't feel it because it hasn't happened yet. Yeah, that's the conditioning. That's the hypnosis.
Rule number 6, overcome anxiety.
Anxiety is doing this, living in survival. When you're living in survival, I'll tell you this, when the survival gene is activated, out of the infinite potentials in the quantum field, you'll always choose the worst case scenario. Why? Because if you're in survival and you're preparing for the worst, there's always better chances of surviving if anything less happens. So people are always selecting the worst thing in their mind, and they begin to emotionally embrace that future before it happens. Thought and emotion, you start conditioning. So you're conditioning the body to become the mind of fear. You keep doing that enough times, once the body becomes the mind, it's a subconscious program. The person has a panic attack. Try as you may to control it with your conscious mind. You can't. You programmed it subconsciously. Now you worry about the next panic attack, and now as you start worrying about the next panic attack, it's the vigilance that creates the next one.
Wow.
Now here's what's happening in our work. People who are self-regulating and creating these elevated states, we have heart scans of them sustaining heart coherence for a whole hour during a meditation. Then at the end of the day, they're still wearing the monitor. It's 8 o'clock at night. They're not even in a meditation. And for a whole entire hour, they're in heart coherence. We say to the woman, what's going on here? She said, I have no idea. I was just getting ready for bed, and all of a sudden my heart just swelled up. It was so intense. I had to lay on my back and surrender to love instead of surrendering to fear. She had a spontaneous love attack instead of a spontaneous panic attack. Now, I would call that the natural state of being. So then, if you're living by those elevated states and you know how to feel that emotion of your future before it happens, you're less likely to wait for it to happen because you'll feel like it already happened. You're less likely to try to control it. You'll know that the moment you lose the feeling, you just disconnected, and you're going to make your way back. And when you get good at it, no person, no thing, no experience can take it away from you. Wow. Now you're empowered. And if you understand the laws of how creation happens, then you're less likely to compete and rush to get what you want. You're going to know that it's going to come to you. And now that's the new model of how we create.
Rule number 7, turn adversity into wisdom.
We had a guy that came in a wheelchair at an event we did recently. He came in that throne. He had ALS. He walked from the back of the room all the way to the stage, walked up the stairs out of that wheelchair on his own. I asked him, he said, I just I just have to work on staying in this emotional state, because the longer I stay there, the more I'm noticing that my body's responding. He's not saying why am I not healed. He understands that the only way he can actually heal is to change him, right? And so now it becomes very practical, right? It becomes very practical.
Don't you think it's important, that practical part of it? I think sometimes people think they're disqualified if they can't explain something they do well. I'm going to tell you one of the interesting things on the show. Many of the people that do things exceptionally well that have been on my show, athletes or entertainers, really don't do a very good job of explaining it.
Yeah.
They embody it. And I think sometimes someone listens to somebody like you who can explain this and think that they're disqualified from becoming good if they can't explain how they're doing it.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it's a repeated experience that becomes familiar for them without the need to express how they're doing it.
Right. Again, for me,
This is your life, is teaching people to do this and giving them the tools. But for the vast majority of people, it's creating the experience that they're going to have.
Everybody has done this at least once in their life.
Exactly.
What did they do? They sat down and they said, what would it be like to be happy? What would it be like to be healthy? What would it be like to have a new life? What would it be like to be in love? And they asked the question, instead of getting on their cell phone and texting someone or posting, they actually sat there and they actually said, let me answer the question. Let me get uncomfortable here. And what is it that I truly want? What would I have to change about myself to be healthy, to be happy, to be successful? What are my bad habits? They get busy writing down all the choices they want to make, all the things they want to do. They start writing down all their goals, all their experiences, and every goal or experience they write down in their future, there's an emotion. They get inspired, they get optimistic, they get grateful, they get energized, and those emotions fuel more thoughts. And now they're actually changing their biology. And then they do something really, 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 really important. They start looking at the thoughts that they no longer want to think. They write them down. I can't, it's too hard, I'll start tomorrow, I don't feel good. They start looking at the choices they're going to have to stop making. And when they understand when they stop making those choices, it's going to be uncomfortable. That's the hardest part about change. They start thinking about the things they have to stop doing. I got to get off the couch. I got to stop watching this. I got to stop overeating, whatever it is. And then we've all done this. And there comes a moment where you start noticing that, like, you start saying, hey, I believe this is actually going to happen, right? And that's when you take the foot off the gas pedal and you start really realizing, wow, I was the resource of actually making this happen. And I changed. I changed in the process. So the exciting part about it, you talk to people who created wealth, you talk to people who created relationships, you talk to people who have created health. They'll tell you, my disease, my poverty was my greatest teacher. My past was my greatest teacher. They look back at their past, and now there's no longer an emotion associated with it. The memory without the emotional charge is wisdom. Now you get to go to the future. You get to create whatever you're free-willed. You could be anybody you want to be in the process.
Rule number 8, reconstruct your mind.
I think, one of the most important things is it's so much easier to forget this information than to remember it, even me, I have to say to myself, okay, Joe Dispenza, what do you know? And take a moment and just set down my cell phone and disconnect from everything and really have a thought, and keep reconstructing the model in my mind. It's so important to do that, because if we understand the what and the why, and the how gets easier, then we assign more meaning and more belief and more intention behind it. And if you have to say, okay, if I'm living by these emotions that are familiar to me, then I'm signaling the same genes in the same way. Okay, now I have to be conscious of not feeling that way, and you have to make a different choice. And the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before, because the moment you decide to do something differently and make a new choice, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to leave the known familiar world of the familiar emotions and thoughts and behaviors. The body, is the unconscious mind, is going to want to return back to what it knows, because we trained it that way. So it's a retraining process. So if the person says, okay, if I can marry a clear intention, I got to work on getting my brain more coherent. Okay, they got that in the formula. That'll be a good signal out. If I can slow my brain waves down, I can learn how to do that. I can get beyond my thinking analytical mind. I can enter the operating system of my autonomic nervous system, program that. Okay. If I can combine it with an elevated emotion, really practice trading that suffering or that pain for something else. Yeah, it may take me a little bit to feel that emotion, but I think if I keep working at it, I'll begin to change my emotional state. When I feel that emotional state, I'm not going to be thinking about the past. I'm going to be thinking about the future. So the thought and the feeling, the stimulus and response, the image and the emotion is conditioning the body emotionally into the future. So the person says, okay, he said, or I read, or someone else said, the environment signals the gene. Okay, let me write that down. Environment signals the gene. Okay, I got to remember that. The end product of an experience in the environment is the emotion. Okay, if I'm feeling gratitude, and gratitude's emotional signature means I've just received something favorable or something wonderful just happened to me. If I can feel the emotion of gratitude before the event occurs, then my body would be so objective that it's living in that future. I would begin to change my gene expression. And the stronger the emotion I feel, the more I'm going to pay attention to the picture in my mind, and I'm going to be remembering my future. My brain and body are going to look like the event has already occurred before it happened. And if genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of my body, and the expression of proteins is the expression of life, then I'm going to keep signaling these. I'm going to keep knocking on the door every day. And I don't care if my life is falling apart. I'm not going to fall to that familiar emotion. I'm not going to speak the same way. I'm not going to think the same way. What thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And with intention and attention, I'm going to keep reviewing them till it becomes an automatic thought in my head, like you can. How am I going to be today? How am I going to be with my family? How am I going to be in traffic? How am I going to be with my coworkers? How am I going to be when I'm alone? And you start rehearsing who you're going to be. The brain in the present moment doesn't know the difference between the outer world or the inner world. It's the brain, what it's imagining looks real. And if we're present, the brain looks like you already did it. You're priming the brain. It's no longer on record of the past. Now it's a map to the future. You're in place. Keep practicing that rehearsal in your mind. It's going to become automatic and you're going to start behaving like that person. Then you said, can I teach my body emotionally what this future feels like before it happens? If you could truly open your heart and truly feel that elevated emotion, if you kept practicing that, I promise you, you would feel more of that in your day and less of the other place. And meditation means to become familiar with. And how you think, how you act, and how you feel is your personality. And your personality creates your personal reality. That's the game, right? So when that occurs, then it's no longer about the past and what happened to you and the story people tell about that. They're telling a story of their future. In fact, they're more in love with their future than they are with their past. They believe in the future more than they believe in their past. And I think that when we believe in ourselves, we believe in possibilities. And when we believe in possibilities, we have to believe in ourselves. And showing up every day means you must believe it's true. When you stop showing up, then you don't believe it's true any longer. And enough people that have that kind of conviction literally step into a new body. They step into a new life. They step into a new future. And I hope that becomes the new normal. And you know, research says that collective networks of observers determine reality. That's the latest. So we just got to make sure enough of us are observing a different reality from an elevated place of union and connection instead of separation that divides communities because of survival and stress. And that's a great way to create polarity in the world. And the union of polarity takes place in the heart, and that's where it starts. It doesn't end there. It just starts there. And when I see the heart informing the brain, I saw two students that we grabbed. One was chasing a little child around, a 1.5-year-old child, and he was being challenged. And the other guy was working and staffing and running around. And we got him in the chair and we said, okay, let's get some brain and heart coherence. And, you know, we had 15, 20 minutes to do it with these guys, and you saw them way out of balance, right? They're just way out of balance. And all of a sudden, here comes that low frequency in the heart. Boom, like a big drum. Boom. Boom. And all of a sudden, you see that low frequency, the energy in the heart that's only indigenous to the heart itself starts rising. And then all of a sudden, you see it rise, and then you see the sympathetic nervous system rise with it. So now we know they're totally relaxed. And they're totally awake and aware. The sympathetic nervous system is working for an arousal. When you see that kind of connection and you see someone be able to change that in a matter of moments, I say they should be able to do that with their eyes open at any moment. It should be such a skill. And that's when we maintain our energy and our power.
Rule number 9, step into the unknown.
A good way to see that is that everybody does it. Like everybody does that all the time. And here's the problem. All of that is fine. The problem is that they're looking through the lens of the past, that reality. They're seeing their future through the lens of the past. They can't see possibility because they can't think greater than how they feel. Or feelings have become the means of thinking. And if you believe that your thoughts have anything to do with your destiny, then you're thinking in the past because those emotions are driving your thoughts, and those emotions are the familiar records of the past, right? So let me just go one step further. So that is how people reaffirm themselves every single day into a known identity. And let's just say the trauma or the betrayal or the loss or the shock or the diagnosis was a profound moment that created a strong emotion, and that person doesn't think that they have any control of regulating and changing that emotion because it's visceral, it's somatic, it's real, they feel it. And that disturbance, that known, they'd rather cling to that pain, they'd rather cling to that suffering than to take a chance and possibility to step outside the unknown. Now, the hardest part, I'm getting to time, by the way, the hardest part about all of this then is not making the same choices you did the day before. So the moment you start to realize that you complain, that you blame, that you make excuses, that you feel sorry for yourself, that you judge others, that you react emotionally to your spouse, to your ex, to your coworker, to traffic, the moment you become conscious that you're doing that and you say, I'm going to stop, well, the body now, the servant, that is now the mind. The servant is now the master. So now the body's clinging to the known, and you say, okay, I'm not going to complain, I'm not going to suffer anymore. You make a different choice, and the body says, well, wait a second, Jonathan, you've been doing that for 30 years. So you just, what? So the body starts influencing the mind. It starts sending signals back to the brain and says, you can't do this. It's too hard. Start tomorrow. It's your mother's fault. It's your culture's fault. It's this. It's your past. And if you accept, believe, and surrender to that thought as if it's true without really having a critical analysis of it, it slips right by your conscious mind, and it causes you to make the same choice that leads to the same behavior that will reproduce the same experience. And there you are on the couch feeling the same emotion, and you say, this feels right. Well, no, that feels familiar, right? So that's how people live in the known. They live in the past. So the predictable future then is everybody gets up in routine and they're on autopilot and they run through a series of automatic behaviors. And if you do that enough time, a habit is a redundant set of automatic unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. Do it enough times, the body will now know how to do it better than the conscious mind. It becomes implicit, right? So now most people lose their free will to a set of programs, and their body's dragging them into a predictable future based on what they did in the past. And that predictable future is the known as well. So if the familiar past is the known and the predictable future is the known, there's only one place left where the unknown exists. And that's really the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And when we truly can become relaxed and dial down the stress hormones that cause us to live in survival, that causes us to try to anticipate the worst case scenario, that remembers the past. If we can work with the body and be greater than the body, to be greater than our attention on every element in our environment, and truly labor for the present moment, that unknown, which has been conditioned into the human being to be a scary place, because in survival, you run from the unknown. If you can teach people to actually relax into the present moment and relax into that place, that's the unknown. That's where possibility exists, and we all do it. And getting to that elegant moment, then, time tends to alter. You think only 10 minutes went by, but an hour and a half went by. And where were you? Well, as your brainwaves slow down in this process, when you're in like a thinking analytical place like we are right now, we're in these brainwave patterns called, you understand, this beta brainwave patterns. But as you slow your body down and it starts moving to alpha, alpha waves tend to cause time to seem a little bit more elongated. When you're in theta, which is when you're half awake and you're half asleep and you're relaxed and awake, in that level of theta, time, one moment seems really long. So you have an extension of time. And it turns out that you can teach people how to do this. And when you do, their autonomic nervous system begins to regulate back into order. And stress is autonomic dysregulation. And all of a sudden, the person has a sense of energy, a sense of euphoria, a sense of freedom, a sense of clarity. Their brains, we've measured this, their brains start firing in more order and more coherence. It oscillates and synchronizes. Different compartments of the brain or communities of neurons are working together, and you start feeling more whole, more like yourself. In the understanding of yoga as an example, if you're truly, really into the act, you forget about all your problems. You forget about all the things you got to do. You forget about what happened yesterday. Breathing is a way to really change your brainwaves. As we've studied this thousands of times. You slow your breathing down, you slow your brainwaves down. You slow your brainwaves down, you stop analyzing and thinking. When do you overanalyze and overthink? When you're in high beta. And when's that? When you're threatened, when you feel danger, when the stress hormones are running. And we've studied the brain when this happens. And when you're analyzing your life within that disturbing emotion, I can guarantee you're going to make your brain worse. In fact, your thought of the problem is actually producing the very chemistry to arouse you further out of balance. So teaching people how to find that generous present moment and actually relax in the unknown and dissociate from their body, dissociate from their environment, and dissociate from time, the predictable future, and the familiar past, causes them, for some reason, to get a reboot in their nervous system. And they think, oh, God, it must have been 10 minutes. And, oh, my God, it was an hour and a half. That to me, is taking all of your attention or disinvesting all of your attention out of this three-dimensional reality. And that's when the door to creation or the mystical moment really begins to happen for people.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is create the life you want.
If you think about the illusion of three-dimensional reality and this hologram that we're fooled into our senses, into this concept of separation. There's me here and there's you there. And there's distance in space and there's objects and there's things. And this three-dimensional reality causes us to go from one point of awareness, I'm here, to another point of awareness, say the front door. And we have to move through space, and when we move through space, it takes time, right? So anything that we want in our lives takes time and energy. You got to go to work, and you got to do all the things, and then you got to save money, and then you go buy the thing. And that's the rules of three-dimensional reality. The plane of demonstration means you got to do something, right? So then there's me here, and then my dreams are way, way out there. And I estimate how long it's going to take for me to arrive at those dreams, because we're playing by the rules of three-dimensional reality. And when we play by those rules, for the most part, I'm going to wait for the experience to occur in order to have the experience produce an emotion. And the emotion is the chemical feedback as a result of the event. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. That's the game in three-dimensional world. If you're going to shorten the distance between cause and effect, between the thought of something and the experience of something, you got to go to a different set of rules, and you have to create from the quantum field. Now, the quantum field is an invisible field of energy that exists beyond this space and time. Now, this takes a little bit of imagination, because if we don't have any space between us, then we're connected. There's no separation, and there's no time. So now, when you go to the realm of the quantum, the rules change, because in the quantum, things are connected. Energy connects things together. So then, if you are able to create from the field instead of from matter, and it's not matter that's emitting a field, it's the field that's actually creating matter. If we could change information in the field, we could change the hologram in three-dimensional reality. And it turns out you only need two things to do that. A super coherent brain, super organized coherent brain, and coherence is a rhythm or an order. So when the brain is coherent, it has a directive. It's an electrical charge. It's the signal we send out into the field. We're broadcasting information with our thoughts. Now, most people who have been conditioned and hypnotized into the rules of three-dimensional reality, they're waiting for the experience to happen to feel the emotion of the experience, to take away their lack or separation, like whatever it's abundance, it's love, it's healing, whatever it is. But in the quantum model, you have to combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion, and that takes heart coherence. So we've done extensive studies in training our community to begin to feel the emotion of the event before it happens. And people will say, well, I don't know how it would feel because I haven't experienced it. Well, the answer is really simple. If you felt gratitude or you felt appreciation or a love for life or a joy for existence, and you combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion, the heart produces a magnetic field, and that magnetic field expands out and it transcends the rules of space and time. When you feel whole, when you feel this elevated emotion, you feel connected, you feel bonded. And so when you feel the emotion of your future, you're connecting to the energy of the future, and your body is so objective. It does not know the difference between the real life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that you're creating by thought alone. The body's actually believing it's living in that future reality in the present moment. So if the thought sends the signal out and the feeling draws the event back and you have brain and heart coherence, you got a really powerful Wi-Fi signal. And when you begin to do this properly, you no longer have to go anywhere to get anything. In other words, you're not living by the rules of cause and effect. You're living by the rules of causing an effect. You're producing an outcome. Now, here's the cool part. If there's a vibrational match between your energy and you've really refined that signal and you can synchronize your energy, you start having synchronicities in your life and you start getting universal signs coming to you. You have opportunities, you have synchronicities, serendipities, coincidences. And you're not going anywhere to get it. They're coming to you. Now, think about this. If you're connected to an invisible field of energy, that's the source of everything physical and material. If you were connected to source, why would you go anywhere? You wouldn't do that. You would say, come to me, right? So by doing this properly and causing an effect, when you see feedback in your life as the result of what you're doing, you're going to pay attention to what you did and you're going to do it again. Now, the cool part is that once you feel the excitement, the inspiration, the joy, the love for life, that's actually reinforcing the feeling that you've created with. And if you create again, you refine the signal a bit more, you get more synchronicities, more opportunities. And the cool part about our community is that they're not saying, oh God, I have to go create my life. They're not saying that. They actually don't want to stop doing it. Because they don't want the magic to end. They don't want those cool quantum events that are occurring in their life to stop. So it's not like I have to. They're changing their energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. And I've been at this long enough to tell you that nobody changes until they change their energy. And so when you experiment with this as a process and you learn a particular formula, and we've been refining this and studying it so much in the last couple of years, that the amount of coherence that we see in some of our student community is so incredibly organized, and not only organized, but the amount of energy in the brain, the amount of energy in the heart is higher amplitude. So now bigger signal, bigger Wi-Fi signal, more connection. And so then if you can shorten the distance between cause and effect, between the thought of what you want and the experience of what you want, then you would start to master your life. And then you would start to see, wow, I could actually, if I could do this, what could I do next? And I'm happy to say that people are doing it pretty well.
I have sat in meditations and out of nowhere I had the most icky, so familiar but so foreign feeling move through me that it was, I don't know, I never saw it coming. I didn't know what it was. And all I did was, instead of run and turn on my cell phone or lay down or quit, I was curious if there was something on the other side of it. So if I stayed present with it and felt it, it was an energy, and that energy is a frequency, and that frequency carries information, or the emotion has a memory, however you want to say it. And so you have to pass through the valley of the shadow of darkness many times to find the light. And I have sat with my body, curious to wonder if there's anything on the other side of this emotion. And if I stayed present with it and felt it, it would turn into something else in time. And so then, think about it. You know, we have different sensations that our body experiences. You may feel like a tightening in your throat and your respiratory rate going up and kind of flush and your heart fluttering, and you may be feeling anxious, but all of those sensations that the body is recording, your interpretation of it is anxiety or being anxious. So the sensations then, the cumulative sensations, as information, we call it an emotion. So the moment we name it, it's anxiety, but those sensations that come up for the body is information. So people then sitting in the presence of that information and allowing you to experience it fully will cause you to move through it. Now for me, I'm all about this. If it's a familiar feeling, more than likely I'm back in some unconscious program, because the emotion is driving certain behaviors, certain habits, certain thoughts. Now that doesn't mean that people can't go through grieving processes, but I do believe that that process for some people becomes a way for them to get attention and to get things in their life that they need. And they use it in a way that becomes part of their identity, and they do that unconsciously. And so for me, I would say then, what greater piece of knowledge could I learn about grief or about myself that I would want to apply to evolve my experience of it and see if there's something on the other side of it? So we look for those answers then, and we build a model. And for example, people grieve a lot for people that die. And I totally get it. But if you had a greater understanding of death, you may not have a grief for that long, because you would say, my goodness, if I truly love this person, if you passed this plane and you saw someone you loved walking around suffering, what would you say to them after a period of time? Hey, if you love me, live your life. I'm going on, go. Enjoy. So I always look, what is my limited belief about something, and could I learn to expand my awareness of what's possible? So if you feel the grief, stay present with it, and see, by staying present with it, if there's something on the other side of it. Sit with it long enough. I've had so many dark nights. I've sat with it until it turned into something else. I just was curious. I didn't want anything out there to do it. I wanted to do it. And when it matters the most is when it's the hardest. That's what I know.
If you think about gratitude, when you receive something favorable, or you just receive something favorable, if something's happening to you or something just happened to you that you are excited about, you feel grateful. So the emotional signature of gratitude means that it's already happened, or something wonderful is happening to you. Now, the body is so objective that it does not know the difference between a real life experience that's creating that emotion and that emotion that you're fabricating by thought alone. So the body's believing it's living in an environmental condition that's favorable to you. And we only accept, believe, and surrender to thoughts that are equal to our emotional state. So in the state of gratitude, your body is more prone to be programmed through its autonomic nervous system into a different destiny. And the research that we've done on our research team shows that just 4 days of feeling gratitude can strengthen your immune system by 50% by releasing an immunoglobulin called immunoglobulin A, which is the body's primary defense against bacteria and viruses. It's better than any flu shot, and it's the body's natural capacity. So when we trade anger and frustration and fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and guilt for an elevated emotion, the autonomic nervous system starts to regulate back into homeostasis and balance. And of course, stress is when the autonomic nervous system is knocked out of homeostasis and balance. It's dysregulation. So we teach people how to give thanks for the things that they create in their life actually before it happens. And when we do that properly, we start to see measurable changes in the person's body and measurable changes in their energy and ultimately measurable changes in their life. So the concept of presence is such an important concept, because I think that paying attention is being present, and it's a skill just like anything else. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. And I think we know when people are present with us in our lives is because they're paying attention to us. And we know when they're not present with us because they're not paying attention. Well, where you place your attention is where you place your energy, bottom line. So if you're thinking about what's going to happen in the next moment, or what's going to happen in a day, or you're reviewing what's something that happened 3 days ago, you're placing your attention in some future scenario or some past memory. And we siphon energy out of the present moment, and we don't have available energy then to really begin to create an outcome in our lives. But if we're truly present and we're relaxed and poised in the present moment, if where you place your attention is where you place your energy, then you have a lot of energy in the present moment to execute, a lot of energy in the present moment to make decisions. The more you do this, the more you experience those moments of flow, the synchronicities, the serendipities, the opportunities, the coincidences, because there's a lot of power in the present moment. So one of the key elements in the creative process is teaching people how to relax into the present moment. So if a person is thinking about their problems, and those problems are memories that are etched in their brain that are connected to certain people and objects and things at certain times and places, the moment they think about their problems, say first thing in the morning when they wake up, if you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny and your brain is a record of the past, the moment you remember your problems, you're thinking in the past. And because every problem has an emotion associated because you experience it, the moment you feel unhappy, now your body's in the past. So thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how we think and how we feel creates our state of being. So most people unconsciously start their day with their entire state of being biologically in the past. And again, the body's so objective, it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience and the emotion that you're creating by thought alone. So that past, that familiar past, is called the known. And if you wake up in the morning and you start thinking about the predictable future and the people you have to see and the places you have to go and the things you have to do in your routine, predictable life, the same exact thing happens. You're imagining that future scenario that's already known to you, and you're anticipating the feeling of that outcome. So that becomes, the predictable future becomes the known as well. So if the familiar past is the known and the predictable future is the known, there's only one place where the unknown exists, and that's the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And teaching people how to create from the present moment is what begins to produce the magic and the changes that take place in their lives.
What's emerging in the world now because of information is teaching people that there are other possibilities that they were unconscious to. And you don't need an authority any longer. You don't need a priest. You don't need a governor. You don't need a teacher. You don't need a doctor to gain information any longer. Information is available. But the question is, what will you do with it? So if you give people sound scientific information, and science is the language of mysticism, and you combine quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics and electromagnetism, and make it simple. And don't talk about tradition or religion or culture. That's going to divide an audience, but bring the model of science in. If that person can reason and understand what they're doing with that information and why they're doing it, then the side effect of how they're doing it is going to get easier. And now the application becomes essential. So what we're seeing is this emergent consciousness where people are taking their power back and not relying on anyone or anything for their own personal change or transformation. And I think that when you get enough people doing it, emergence in biology is a group of birds all moving in the same direction, of a school of fish all moving. The appearance is a larger organism. They're behaving in the exact same way. There's no leader. When you study that in biology, everybody's leading. Yeah. So how are we going to change the world? It's not one person, not one consciousness. It's a collective consciousness. And the research says that collective networks of observers determine reality. Get enough people believing in possibility, sooner or later, someone's going to run into that experience. And you need one. And once you know it's possible, then other people will start doing it as well, just like the 4-minute mile. So in the world right now, I think we're seeing a breaking down of so many conventions, whether it's religion or medicine or the environment or journalism. Everything's falling apart right now because it can't sustain itself, because no organisms in nature live in this kind of abusive competition. Organisms survive in cooperation and connection and communion. Keep people in fear, keep them angry, keep them in pain, keep them all those survival emotions. You'll never have community. You bring people into an elevated emotional state, something innate in the human species says we're empathic to one another, and we celebrate one another, we want to get along with one another, we want to cooperate, we want to resolve issues together. That's who we are when we're not living in stress and survival.
If your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel, and it is, yes or no, and you stop thinking the same way, and nerve cells that no longer fire together, no longer wire together, every place where one neuron connects with another neuron is called a memory. So as you begin to unfire and unwire, you prune the very circuits in your brain that are connected to the old self. And the memory of the old self begins to mutate, begins to change. So then you would say, where is that memory stored? And it's stored in the soul now as wisdom, because you're no longer that person. Yes or no? And if you could no longer behave the same way, and nerve cells that no longer fire together, no longer wire together, and pruning is part of biology, you don't use it, you lose it, then your memory of the old self would begin to change. And that is a biological death in the beginning that is uncomfortable for a lot of people. If you're no longer feeling the same emotions that keep you connected to the past, and you keep inhibiting that process, the body will be craving the chemicals in the beginning because it's been conditioned that way. It's been addicted. It's the mind. And it's anticipating events and the emotions from those events, and you're putting the brakes on. And that's uncomfortable. And you got to stay conscious, and it takes an enormous amount of energy. And you're no longer signaling the same genes and producing the same hormones. And your body is no longer being influenced by your mind in the same way. And sometimes the mind is the biggest enemy to the body. And you're inhibiting that process. And the body, which has become the mind, wants its way. And it's uncomfortable to change. And you got to be able to be greater than that to truly change. And everybody that's changed has come up against that feeling. And they almost make the same choice, and they don't. And they're so glad that they didn't. And it takes an enormous amount of energy and awareness to do that. So as the old self deconstructs, because you have the free will to decide who you want to be on a moment-to-moment basis. And if your life isn't changing and you want to change your life, you got to change. And now you are playing the game, and you are now saying, this personality, this person that I've become, I'm in the habit of being it, and I want to become somebody else. And the more you learn about love, the more you learn about life, the more you learn about possibility and potential, the more you become aware of it, there are more possibilities, and knowledge is the thing that gives us that. And so the old self is a memory, like another lifetime. Like you can remember it, but you're no longer interested in it any longer because it no longer defines you. How many people understand what I'm talking about? So then the biological death of the old self is crossing a river of change, and you got to stay with it long enough to become somebody else. And you think it's about wealth, you think it's about health, it's about who you become. The people who become somebody else, they see dramatic changes in their health and in their lives. And they can't find the words to be able to explain it. But it's practical, though. If you truly want to change your life, you have to change yourself. You would have to be conscious of your thoughts and aware of your actions and familiar with those emotions, and you would never fall from grace. And if you did, you would stop and self-correct. If you truly were interested in evolution, and if you said to me, I lost it because of that person, I'd say to you, you're back to the unconscious program of allowing your environment to control how you feel and think. You got two choices. Stay there for another 6 hours, or pause and change your energy. Change your energy and get back to the emotions of your future and the feelings of your future. It's a much better place to be. Reason this with me. You could have a great meditation and condition your body just like you did into the future. You come back to your senses and you return back to the same old self, romance in the past again. You're going to weigh that 50-minute, 1-hour meditation against the rest of the day back to you. You got to start practicing. We have to start doing it with our eyes open. And the thought of who we want to become should produce the feeling of it instantaneously. In other words, the thought of your future should produce the feeling that it already happened instead of the feeling of lack because it hasn't happened. How many people understand that? And the people who do this well, they condition their body into the future. And they say, I don't know how it happened. It's like my body was led right to the event. And your body's going to follow your mind to an unknown, just like it follows your mind to the toilet every morning. But instead of it being the known, it's going to be the unknown. That's where your attention and your energy has been. And I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what you believe in. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, what you eat. I don't care. It doesn't matter. I've seen it in all ways. So then the thought of our future, if we're doing this properly, should produce the feeling that it already happened. If the thought of your future produces the lack that it hasn't happened, you're still in your past, and nothing is going to change. And it would make sense then that you would want to get that heart open on a regular basis so that you can feel the emotions of your future before it happens. I'm telling you, there is a lot of biology that changes in you. And you do it enough times, you become that person. The thought of it then produces the feeling that it's already happened. That's how you know you're getting close, independent of what's going on in your life. That's when you're mastering yourself and mastering your life.
When we become the living example of truth, when we actually embody this, that there are no limits to what we can do. And I'm hopeful with human beings that we have this capacity. And of course, when we believe in ourselves, we believe in possibility. And when we believe in possibilities, we believe in ourselves. And I think that is the ultimate belief.
Feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences. And you can remember experiences better because you can remember how they feel. And when you're in the midst of an experience, all of your senses plug you into the environment. And as you're gathering all of this vital data from your external world, all that information rushes back to your brain, and it causes jungles of neurons to organize themselves into networks. The moment those neurons string into place, the brain makes a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. And once you feel that emotion, you create a long-term memory. Now reason this with me. If feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and you are feeling the same way every single day, doesn't that mean nothing new is happening in your life? And if those feelings and emotions drive certain thoughts, and you can't think greater than how you feel, because you had events in your life that have branded you emotionally, and you feel sadness or guilt or shame or unworthiness or insecurity, all of those emotions are created from past experiences. And when you feel those emotions, and those emotions drive certain thoughts, and then those thoughts make certain chemicals for you to feel the same emotion, and then those emotions drive certain thoughts, the repetition of that cycle then conditions the body to memorize that emotional state better than the mind. And now your body literally is in the past. Because if you can't think greater than how you feel, then you are thinking in the past. And so most people then spend the majority of their life talking about why they never arrive at their vision of the future because of some past experience. And so if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, you remember your first kiss, you remember your wedding, you remember the birth of your children, you remember catching a fish off the coast of Manzanillo with your 3 best friends, because you caught the fish and it was a new experience and you felt great. And then you went to the casita and you cooked the mahi-mahi and you drank Sauvignon Blanc and the wind was blowing off the sea and the sun was setting and you made a long-term memory. But you also have memories that are connected to trauma and crisis, to disappointments. And those are the memories that people remember more than anything else. And so if you haven't overcome some emotion that keeps you anchored to the past, then you tell a story about the past. And people say, I am this way because of this experience that happened to me 15 years ago. I am this way because of some event that happened 30 years ago. And from a biological perspective, it means I haven't been able to change in the last 15 or 30 years. And Scientific American, a prestigious magazine, says that 50% of what you talk about in your past isn't even the truth. You make it up. Because you don't have the same brain that you did 15 years ago or 30 years ago. So then your brain and body are typically in the past, because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So if you think insecure thoughts, in a matter of seconds, you are going to feel insecure. The moment you feel insecure, your brain is monitoring how you're feeling, and you think more insecure thoughts, which then makes you feel more insecure. And the repetition of that cycle conditions the body to become the mind of insecurity. And then the person says, I am insecure. And whenever you say, I am anything, you are commanding your mind and body into a destiny. So then how do people change? They wait for crisis, trauma, disease, diagnosis, loss. Something has to go wrong in their life where they feel so uncomfortable that they finally make up their mind to change. And why is that? Because after the trauma or the crisis, they don't feel like of themselves. And the moment they don't feel like themselves, they could actually observe themselves. Because they are looking at themselves through the eyes of someone else. But my message is, why wait? You can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. Memory is creative. That in fact, 50% of that story you embellish. People make up that story. Let me tell you why they make up that story. Because they excuse themselves for the fact that they haven't been able to change since that event. They'll have to make it sound worse than it really was.
To make it harder to grow and change.
So that they can reaffirm their limited sense of their inability to change. So then that story becomes more and more of a story, and it's less of the truth, because you got to work yourself up into a state. There were lions and tigers, and there was, there were helicopters,
snowstorms, and
everybody was firing bullets, worse than you could possibly imagine. And then you got to feel that emotion, right? And then you look at, oh yeah, it must have been really bad. Now that's your identity now. That's your identity. If you are not defined by some vision that is bigger than you, and you are not passionate about that vision, then you're left with the old hardware of the past in your brain, and you will be predictable in your life. So would you agree then? New thoughts, new information should lead to new choices. New choices should lead to new behaviors. And new behaviors should create new experiences. And new experiences should produce new emotions. And those new emotions should drive new thoughts. And that's called evolution. So if your brain is a record of the past, and you don't have a vision of the future, then you are living in the past. And you will never arrive at that new future. If you have been an experienced
if you had experience of trauma, say, for example, and it's created the feeling of fear, and your fear is that it could happen again. And you don't know this, but every time you think about that future, that possible worst case scenario, and you feel the emotion, you're conditioning your body to become the mind subconsciously of anxiety. So now, all you need now is some cue in your outer environment that says it's unsafe, that there's damage there, that you're a victim, something's bigger than you that could have an effect on you. Well, now that feeling of fear is going to cause you to think thoughts equal to it. So the person then no longer needs the environment to feel that fear. They just have to have the thought about that condition now. And now they're literally knocking their brain and body out of balance by thought alone. And the body's constantly living in emergency mode. And it takes a lot of energy, a lot of resources to live in emergency mode all the time. And guess what system becomes compromised by it?
Immune system.
Your immune system. Why? Because you have two protection systems. You got a system that protects you from dangers in your outer world. That's the gas pedal. That's the sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight or flight nervous system. Danger, threat out there. Use all the energy because you got to survive. And when you survive, you got to take care of your body. So So now that system can work really well short term. It doesn't work really well if you keep it on all the time. Because if you're mobilizing all that energy for some threat in your outer world, there's no energy in your inner world for growth and repair. There's no energy for long-term building projects. And energy leaves the brain and it leaves the heart and it moves into these lower centers because now you're tapping the body's resources because there is an emergency. But whether the emergency is real or imagined, whether your anger is valid or justified or not, that you're tapping the body's very energy to heal by doing this. And the immune system says, well, we're part of really the other nervous system. We're the brake. We're the clutch. We need to get into relaxation. We need to get back into balance again. And when we do, then we'll metabolize. Then we'll assimilate. We'll reproduce. We'll excrete properly. Mm-hmm. So now you got this kind of battle between the gas pedal and the brake, and the immune system says, hey, listen, if there's foreign agents, if there's viruses, bacteria, molds, funguses, listen, we don't have a whole lot of energy here to deal with them because we're fighting this war out there. There's no homeland security. So they shut down certain receptors in the immune system. They shut down function of those lymphocytes, those white blood cells that are your inner army of protection. And it takes a lot of energy to fight a virus and a bacteria. But if there's no energy, hey, listen, it takes energy to raise the body's temperature. Where do you think that comes from? That's part of that branch called the autonomic nervous system. And the sympathetic, the gas pedal, is part of it. And the parasympathetic is the clutch, is part of that autonomic nervous system. And it's a check and balance. But so you stay in emergency for an extended period of time. And now you're exposed to some antigen or some external substance, some foreign agent.
Why is our memory for pain stronger than our memory of a success or a joy?
I really think that when the survival gene is activated, preservation is the key. So we can have 10 things that happen really great in our lives. You have a family member or somebody you know that does this. They have 10 really great things happen in their one thing bad, and they focus on that bad thing. Why? Because the survival gene is activated. They want to make sure it doesn't happen again. So you put your attention on it because you don't want it to happen again. So what people do when they're aroused is they start thinking it's going to happen. And so they actually select the worst case scenario in their mind and then emotionally embrace that future before it happens. And they're conditioning their body become the mind of anxiety and fear. So in preservation and in survival, if you prepare for the worst, anything less that happens, you have a better chance of surviving. So that's the mechanism that takes place. So survival means you better take care of your body.
Yeah.
You better be aware of your environment and make sure there's no threats. And so you got to keep your eye out there. And you better be thinking about the future based on what you learned in the past. Now, there's nothing wrong with that when the analytical facilities are in balance. But when there's an arousal, there's 3 things that create arousal: fear, hostility and anger or aggression, and pain. And that arousal drives the brain into these high states of what we call high beta. And Most people need something or someone or some circumstance or some drug or some pill or some computer game to change that internal state. And the moment they notice a change in their internal state, then they pay attention to what's causing it. And they start developing a dependency on it, right? So it turns out that when we teach people how to self-regulate and change their brainwaves, we could actually see then that the incoherence, the disorderliness that's taking place in the brain, when you're over-aroused, you're overly analytical, and you're shifting your attention from one problem to one person to one thing to one place to another problem to another circumstance to your phone to your car, and each one of those elements has a neurological network in the brain. So the arousal causes these different circuits to fire out of order, and the brain is incoherent. So take two waves that are out of phase and mix them. When they interfere, they flatten out. There's no energy. So energy leaves the brain, right? So then, when you're in arousal, you narrow your focus on the cause. If there's something rattling in the bushes and it's dark, you freeze and you narrow your focus on it, and there's a rush of adrenaline and your pupils dilate and your heart starts to race and you're ready to run, fight, or hide. I mean, that's a survival moment. But what if it's your coworker sitting right next to you or 6 feet away, and you're judging them? You're the same arousal's taking place. And what's once very adaptive becomes very maladaptive. And this is where it gets challenging. So when we teach people how to open their focus, we've done thousands and thousands of brain scans, and they get beyond their analytical processes and they open their awareness and go from a convergent focus to a divergent focus, and they learn how to relax and regulate. Their brain waves start to slow down into alpha. And then if they do it properly and they're connecting, those different compartments of the brain that were once firing out of order start to unify. Different communities form bigger communities. The brain starts to synchronize. And then all of a sudden you start seeing different compartments of the brain all in resonance. So now when they're all in resonance and they start interfering, when those waves come together, there's more energy in the brain. So when a person dials down the mechanism, this neocortex that plugs us into three-dimensional reality, that keeps us aware of our body, that's the autobiographical self, where everything's stitched in memory in there. When we start deactivating the mechanism here, and we get beyond the memory bank of the known self, and brainwaves move into theta, we've studied this so much. When a person can let their body be in a light state of sleep and feel so safe that you can finally let go and surrender, the body is sleeping, but the mind is awake. And now the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is wide open. And if they can regulate and stay there, something amazing happens. There's a release of energy from the body, and their brain goes into a very, very super coherent state of gamma. And gamma is super consciousness. Now, I'm not talking about a little gamma. I'm not talking about a lot of gamma. I'm not talking about a really lot of gamma. I'm talking about a supernatural amount of gamma. There's so much order and so much energy in the brain. Like if we were in an audience and we were all clapping like this, that could be alpha, right? Theta would be, and if everybody could do this, the slower we could do it, the more we can get our timing down, the more we can get coherent. But if we were doing this, it would be really hard for all of us to do that at the same time. So it takes a lot of order, a lot of awareness, a lot of energy to be able to create that kind of order. So that's how fast the brain is, and that arousal that's taking place is ecstasy. That arousal is bliss. It is the most familiar, unfamiliar feeling that people ever have. And that memory then that the person has that is so profoundly different than the feeling of success, the feeling of wealth, the feeling of orgasm or love or whatever. This is a new one, and it's a thrill. And the person notices a dramatic change in their inner state. And with that experience comes a very lucid picture, a very profound insight, a download of information. That's the moment then the body many times rewrites the biological program. Energy is informing matter, and the autonomic nervous system is regulating. It's in high order. And remember, disease is autonomic dysregulation. Now it's getting into a very, very high frequency of order, and it's sending very coherent information to the cells and tissues, sending energy to the cells and tissues, and cells begin to emit more coherent light and information. And then there's the disease, and there it's not. Bond University
university in Australia on the Gold Coast. Senior researcher took the large majority of my brain scans, and she had them analyzed by her graduate students, and they statistically looked at everything. One of the most startling things for the research team was our community's ability to get to that point where there's nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, no time. Now I'm talking 4 seconds. I'm talking 5 seconds. I'm talking 9 seconds. Just give me a second. I know how to do this. They've practiced it enough times that the creative moment is when you get beyond yourself, when you dissociate from everything known in your material world. Turns out when you do that and you start changing your brainwaves slow down into alpha and theta. You're suppressing the memory bank of the known self that keeps you plugged into three-dimensional reality. When you quiet down this mechanism, now all of a sudden you start connecting to that field. And when you can stay conscious in those subconscious realms, when you can literally regulate and change brainwaves, now you're in the operating system where you can make those significant changes. I believe in free will. Yeah. I would never tell anybody what to believe, like politically or socially or whatever. Yeah. I want to provide them the tools and give them the free will to create life however they want and believe whatever they want. That's totally cool with me. So those people then that want to be healed and they live in fear, that fear has to be addressed. I mean, and it's not easy because it's hardwired deep in the limbic brain. It's just a safety net. It's a mechanism. So then imagine being in the unknown. The instinct in the unknown is it's a scary place. Wow, imagine not having a body. And we practice lingering without a body in an infinite space, and without a name, without a face, without a culture, without a job, without a social security number, without a disease, without a diet, just as an awareness. You practice that. You're going to be comfortable in the unknown. You're going to relax more into it. That's going against thousands of years of programming. And the people who actually overcome their fear and they trade it for gratitude, their immune system gets stronger, their genes upregulate. I mean, there's just a host of everything changes. Their brain changes, their heart rate variability. They feel differently, and it's being measured. And some of these people, we're measuring this now in our events with reputable scientists and universities. They're shocked at what they're witnessing on a cellular level, on a brain level, on a heart level. They cannot believe the capacity of the body. I just got an email today of one of our scientists said, I ran this 3 times. The virus that we exposed the cell to in advanced meditators does not enter the cell. It's outside the cell. It won't. The virus in novice meditators, some of it's in the cell, some of it's outside. Controls all the viruses in the cell. There's an immunity. So when the person's less reactionary to their environment, there's less of response that weakens them, they're less of a victim to their environment, then they're less of a victim to their environment. Large scale, small scale, the body has a greater immunity to whatever it is. I think we've been hypnotized and conditioned into becoming materialists. I think that we define reality with our senses. And I think that is one of the biggest delusions. So the fundamental question is, can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain has literally changed to look like the event has already occurred? Now, the latest research in plasticity says that's absolutely possible. And can you select a new possibility in the quantum field and begin to emotionally embrace that future every single day to such a degree that your body, as the unconscious mind, the objective mind, does not know the difference between the experience in your life that's creating the emotion and the emotion that you're fabricating by thought alone, to the degree that you begin to signal new genes and new ways to change your body to look like the experience has already happened. Now, the latest research in epigenetics says it's absolutely possible. Now, think about this. Every day, installing the circuitry, every day conditioning the body into the emotion of the future, that your body begins to change to look like it's already happened. Now, this is where it gets fun, because now you no longer have to go anywhere to get it. now it begins to come to you. You become the vortex or the magnet to your destiny. So then people who come out of their meditation and they say, well, I just focused on my wealth. Why isn't it there? Well, you're not that good. If you're asking why isn't it there, you're back to the old person again. Stay in that state for an extended period of time as an experiment, as the scientist in your life, to keep your energy connected to the dream of your future. And then see what kind of effects begin to take place without moving into impatience, without moving into frustration, without starting to analyze why it hasn't happened or when. That is the trap of defining reality with your senses. So you have the thought of your future and you don't see it, then you experience separation. But people who are practicing this work, they have the thought of their future and they feel the emotion of their future. They're still connected to it, right? So that takes practice. And it's just learning, like hitting a golf ball, hitting a tennis ball, dancing the salsa, crocheting, whatever it is. You gotta start out staying real conscious and learning. And then you get good at it and it gets to be instrumental. It gets to be fun. And that's what I want for everybody, that the act of creation should be a blissful, playful, ecstatic, loose, free process. And so I love the idea of people taking time out of their lives to prove to themselves that if they're defined by the vision of the future, then they're not living by the memories of the past. And that's where the unknown exists. So many people, the unknown is a scary place. So they don't see that future because they're used to seeing that future with evidence with their senses. And you have to be able to get beyond that and stay in the unknown, stay in that discomfort, and then in that moment to begin to self-regulate. Like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little anxiety. Ooh, I'm starting to feel a little frustration. That's the defining moment where your body's going back to the past, because emotions are a record of the past. Or you go into routine again. So you catch yourself. It's a victory. And if you keep catching yourself, those victories add up. And it's not so much about your wealth or your health or your freedom or your new relationship. It's actually about who you become. If we teach a person then how to trade that frustration or that hatred for an elevated emotion, and they'll say, yeah, but it was my ex's fault, or I got betrayed by my partner in business. Yeah, we know that. Okay, so let's take your partner in business or take your ex. Let's duct tape them, put them in a cannon, and shoot them to the moon. Now what are you going to do? Sooner or later, you got to reckon with yourself and change, right? So then teach a person then how to trade that emotion for an elevated emotion. Now,
trade the emotion for an elevated emotion.
Right. So you're going to give that up and you're going to practice feeling gratitude as an example.
Yes.
And the person says, well, I can't feel gratitude. And I say, absolutely you can, because you don't practice feeling it. You practice spending most of your time feeling hatred and frustration. So now it's going to take a little time to cause that heart of you to bloom, or your heart of yours to bloom. Once they're able to feel even the smallest measure of gratitude, where they start feeling appreciation, thankfulness, gratitude, it's emotional signature. When you get something, when you're receiving something, when something has happened to you, or when something is happening to you, you say thank you because you're receiving something. So the emotional signature of gratitude means the event has already happened, or it's happening to you. So the moment you open your heart and you feel gratitude, well, that emotion then is telling the body that the experience has already occurred. And the thought then can make it into the body because it's consistent with the thought. So now you're beginning to program the autonomic nervous system into a very specific destiny. You got to maintain that modified state of mind and body your entire day, independent of the conditions in your outer environment, independent of your body's cravings of those emotions and habituations, and independent from time. And if you can, get ready, because something weird or unusual, some synchronicity, some coincidence, some opportunity is going to land in your lap. And you didn't have to go and get it. Yes. It came to you. Now you're the vortex of creation. So if you say to me, well, I was feeling gratitude, but then there was traffic, or my coworker sent me a nasty email, then I would say, oh my God, you mean you're allowing your environment, your outer environment, to control how you feel and think, you're back to the unconscious program that you're the victim to your life.
You got it.
But when you start producing those outcomes in your life, you're going to pay attention to what you did inside of you, and you're going to believe more that you're the creator of your life and less of the victim of your life. I think this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And if you rewind the tape 10 years ago, you know, information was the thing that stimulated thought, stimulated new ideas. And as we learn new things, we make new connections in our brains. So as we begin to add new stitches into that three-dimensional tapestry in our mind, we're beginning to cause our mind to function in new ways. But the key then is to apply it, to personalize it, to do something with it. And 10 years ago, when I got in front of an audience and talked about the application, nobody wanted to step outside that philosophical, theoretical, intellectual realm, right? Because doing something means you're going to have to change something about yourself.
Painful.
Yeah, you're going to get uncomfortable, right? And I think we're in an age of information. And in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. And because of technology, we have access to so much content. And information creates awareness. And awareness is consciousness. And you can't have consciousness without energy. They work together. So there's an energetic change, I think, that's taking place in the world right now, where people are so informed that old models, old paradigms are beginning to break down, whether it's the medical model or the religious model, the education model, journalism, the economy, you know, politics. It's all beginning to come to the surface because something else has to come out. And I think that one of the things that people are realizing is that you don't have to be a Buddhist monk to do this, or a nun with 40 years of devotion. You just got to understand the formula. And just like any skill or anything you learn, you got to go from thinking to doing to being. You got to take knowledge, you create the experience, and if you keep doing it over and over again, you start getting a skill, or you start getting wise about how to do it. And you know that you know how to do it. Overcoming the old self allows us to become somebody else. And there is that period of transition. Yeah. I call it the void, where there's just not a lot happening. And you just got to be able to keep going and continuously get to the end of your belief, where most people stop. I just had a fabulous conversation with someone this weekend. Broke through to the other side, and now there's so much magic happening around this person, but she's worthy now to receive it. And that is the key, because the universe only gives us what we think we're worthy of receiving. So we got to become initiated into this and understand that thousands of years of programming that says that we have to change things matter to matter. You know, in three-dimensional reality, and it will take time, but to begin to connect to that resource called the quantum field and create from the field instead of from matter, there's a lot of unlearning that has to go on.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video, because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from John Assaraf, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
A lot of athletes have this term around the A game and showing up and doing their absolute best, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, etc. And it got me thinking about, do you even know what your A game